So there's a concept called reflective judgment.
Mm-hmm.
And that is basically the way you're sort of perceiving the world. What do you think a justified belief means versus an opinion? What does truth mean? You start to, analyze these things. So I'm
Mm-hmm.
going to jump all the way to the highest sort of level of reflective judgment because there are various stages. Just like when you can see how a kid develops cognitively over time, you can see there are
Mm-hmm.
stages, and there clearly can be growth, and there are higher sort of tiers of operating.
Mm-hmm.
So there's what's called reflective reasoning.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm just going to read this short paragraph, but we can sort of pick it apart. Reflective reasoning, the highest sort of tier in this system, reflective judgment system, for understanding the world around you and making decisions and behaving.
Mm-hmm.
People who hold these assumptions accept that knowledge claims cannot be made with certainty. You're not absolutely certain of anything. There's not like 100% certainty. There's uncertainty involved in any knowledge claim that you make.
Okay.
I can like here's an example. I can drop this
Mm-hmm.
and I can say it's gonna drop every time I let go. It's gonna drop, but I can't say that with 100% certainty. I've only done it as many times as I've done it, and maybe if I did it 1 billion
So they
times,
have a higher standard for what truth is.
exactly.
A much higher, an unattainable standard for what truth is. Okay, well, we're not going to get too far with that.
Exactly. And here's the next step. So, but they are not immobilized by it. So rather than letting that shut you down as you realize that you don't have access to
The
100%
truth.
certain
Okay.
knowledge, you say rather they make judgments that are most reasonable about which they are relatively certain. So I am relatively certain that when I let go with these fingers and have
Mm-hmm.
nothing holding on, it's going to drop.
Mm-hmm.
So you can, and what do you do that? So which you're relatively certain based on their evaluation of available data. So again, what is my available data? I've used my eyes and I can see it dropping and I
Yeah.
can hear it when
You're
it
using
hits.
your
And,
sensory input to, verify
right.
that information.
Yeah, and data can be other things too. You can read books, you can look at studies.
Mm-hmm.
Data could be anything. You can just talking to you. I've gotten so much data, especially about behavioral analytics,
Me
etc.
too. I learned so much from you too, Michael.
Appreciate it. So this continues. They believe they must actively construct their decisions, which goes back to kind of what I was saying. Rather than just
Mm-hmm.
impulsively doing things or by
You
your
have to make a
compulsion.
plan before they
Exactly.
execute it.
Yeah, you actively
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
use that process to construct your decisions,
Mm-hmm.
and that knowledge claims must be evaluated in relationship to the context, the keyword context, in which they were generated to determine their validity. So you have to look at the actual context. Context becomes the most important concept.
Mm-hmm.
Context dictates literally everything.
Correct.
In this context, you could make a certain decision, but in another context where a bunch of other factors were similar, new context, it might be better to make a new decision.
That's right.
And what's interesting is your personal context is constantly changing because
Absolutely.
you keep getting new inputs, you keep getting different results, and
And your environment changes even without your control, and that changes you in turn and your behavior.
Exactly. So that's constantly changing.
Mm-hmm.
So context becomes very important. It's a fluid, changing sort of process, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
They also readily admit their willingness to reevaluate the adequacy of their judgments as new data or new methodologies become available. So rather than saying whatever it is that they're trying to say, as new information comes in or a new way of looking at things comes in, a new methodology, new data, whatever it is, they say, okay, well, now I need to reevaluate. When I made a decision before, when I was actively trying to process this before, I didn't know that piece of information. And it seems like it might be relevant. Let me see if it changes what my behavior should be or what my view should be. And that's sort of the whole concept of very, very high level of collective reasoning. That is like the highest level that I'm aware of that a lot of people like. This is
Yeah, and you're basically describing the process of contemporary research methods, at least when it comes to behavior analysis science, is that we definitely look at the context and the way in which data has been evaluated. Just to say, oh, we've reached these results, before it was 0 and now it's 20, yay, it's working. We're gonna go, no, backtrack, show me exactly how did you compare the two events, and if it doesn't fit the criteria that we've already known and created and it's solidified and we've tested and retested and tested it, then it's not good enough. That's it.
Yeah, that's great.
This is such a much higher order and much higher effort of behavioral effort when it comes to evaluating information to people. What's majority of kids, and I'm just remembering myself when I graduated, even let's say with my associate's degree, after being 20 years old, thinking, "Ooh, I'm so smart. I have a couple of years of college under my belt, and I'm not the stupidest person anymore. I know what's going on." And I remember how I used to evaluate information even with that short exposure. And I was a little bit exposed in all of our sciences class of what research methods are. But still, I did not have the skills or the tools to be able to look at a headline in a newspaper and truly know how to make sure that what I'm reading is truth or not. I would look at it, I would maybe skim it a little bit, and I would make up my own opinion about whether or not I agree or not. And looking back now, all of that were just behavior interventions that I fell into. And I believed all that stuff. And I voted for the people that they wanted me to vote for. And I've voted against my own interest and my own future, unfortunately, because those are very effective.
Yeah, and what you just described is actually perfect. I wasn't thinking about doing this, but I think it's worth it. So reflective reasoning, as you just mentioned, it takes more effort, more energy. It's a higher level,
it's homework. And we're conditioned to think that homework is bad and unpleasant. And this is where we are now.
Yeah, but I think it's worth it. I want to read the little short. It's even shorter. The blurb about, I'll call it a blurb, the little paragraph about what the lowest stage of sort of operating would be. So this would be, so we talked about reflective reasoning, like true,
really deeply evaluating variables and making sure that even the research method used are adequate and make sense rather than just
absolutely
hoopla.
The context, letting new data come in and actually taking it seriously. That's rather than saying, oh, I already know the answer.
And being able to reject, even when your whole career is on the line. Being a real scientist means saying 30 years down the drain, hail science, because that's what you have to do.
Absolutely. And that's intellectual humility. That's one of my 4 top principles, which is intellectual humility, like recognizing that you could literally be wrong about something that you are absolutely certain of, or that you put so much time and effort in. You just have to be able to be humble about that and say, okay, reality, I've got this new piece of information, or here's a new methodology, whatever it is. Unfortunately, as I've reflected, I realized that I was doing something wrong the whole time. Maybe I was just listening to what I was told as opposed to processing it myself. And that can be a painful thing to sort of realize at times. That's why I use the word unfortunate. Even though in the overarching context, it is fortunate. You get to learn through that and grow from that, right? Because then you have a way to improve, which to me is really valuable because you want to grow.
Yeah, you're right. I stand corrected.
But it's a difficult. It can be painful, and if you don't have that sort of mindset, if you're not looking at it through the lens of someone who's already humble, yeah, that's what's going to happen a lot of the times is people just get stubborn. I put 30 years into this. I don't care what you say. I'm not taking any new applications or new information. None of that.
Yeah. That's confirmation bias. I think that's what they refer to as psychology. Is when you just reject any new information that's going to contradict.
That's 100%, and a lot of people do that. Even a lot of the top scientists in the past, top psychologists, top everything. What you learn, what I've learned, but what's a principle that's worth remembering, or an idea is, authority figures are not always right. You can become an authority figure by doing everything the wrong way,
Mm-hmm.
reaching all the wrong conclusions, and still manage to be an authority
Which
figure.
is exactly what's been happening the last 40 years. That's
Unfortunately,
how
that's
you become a person of authority in today's society, by doing things that are wrong, that are unethical, that are just borderline corrupt and inhumane and cruel.
it makes people like you and I, it makes our jobs, so to speak, harder. It makes our goals more difficult to obtain, just because all of the inputs that we're getting is, oh, if you do things the wrong way, you'll be rewarded, and if you try to do things the
Yeah.
right way, you're gonna get kicked and taken advantage of.
Oh,
So we're in an environment that is not fostering having integrity.
yeah, it's not a nurturing environment for anything good to grow, unfortunately. You know, this
Right.
bad stuff just flourishes here, but and good stuff, it's hard. You really need to nurture it.
Yeah, we have to. I view it as the grass breaking through the concrete, the flower breaking through the concrete. It has a lot of
That's right.
layers upon layers upon layers of stuff trying to like
Mhm.
suppress it and prevent its growth. But if your goal is growth and you don't get intimidated and you go step by step, little by little, I think you can break through the concrete, just like the grass, the flowers do sometimes. I take that sort of perspective on it. At least when
I
I've
like that.
reflected on my own life, because that's where I saw a similarity in nature. I saw that similarity. I just realized one day when I was outside, like, that's something actually worth reflecting on, is how this thing has literally gone through being covered with concrete to breaking through and growing through that. I think it's useful to reflect on a lot of things in nature personally. Anyways, but that's my own way of doing
I
it.
completely agree with you. I also draw those similarities as well.
But so basically the lowest, least energy and least effective, really, way of reasoning would be the pre-reflective reasoning. So you don't reach reflection at all, which is belief that knowledge is gained through the word of an authority figure or through first-hand observation. So either I saw it myself, and everything I see is obviously true, because you don't factor in your own
Mhm.
tools and their weak weaknesses.
You haven't been taught to, yeah. That hasn't
So
been reinforced. It's most likely it's been punished when you've been asking too many questions.
that's a big part of the problem.
Mm-hmm.
So again, knowledge is gained through. This is the way people in this lower tier of thinking, I guess you can call it, of reasoning, would operate, where they just believe that knowledge is gained through the word of an authority figure or through first-hand observation, rather than, for example, through evaluation of evidence. So they're not looking to evaluate evidence. They're just looking at, what did I witness, or how do I feel in that situation? That's it. That's all that matters. You don't ask 100 people and figure out and start to piece together, oh, wow, they had different experiences in the way that they had reacted to something versus me. You don't do any of that. So people who hold these assumptions believe that what they know is absolutely correct and that they know with complete certainty. So it's like basically the complete opposite of someone who has reflective reasoning, where you're aware that you're actually uncertain about everything to some degree, and the best you can do is try to find the most reasonable. You have like your certainty is not absolute. There's a relative amount of certainty.
Mm-hmm.
So people who hold these assumptions treat all problems as though they were well structured. So basically, overall, what's happening is someone who's operating with pre-reflective reasoning on the lower sort of end of the spectrum, they really are a software program, but they have not interfered whatsoever in their process. They didn't jump in at any point, and you can't really fault them to an extent. That is what their genetics and environment and
yeah, if the environment did not teach them to reflect and did not teach them to analyze, they're never going to be able to do it.
And you mentioned something critical, which was they're getting oftentimes consequences, negative consequences, when they try to talk back to the teacher, right? They want to correct the teacher, let's say. Oh, you're talking back. You're being disrespectful.
Yeah.
You're punished.
Insubordinate.
Insubordinate. That reminds me of a Key and Peele sketch. Insubordinate, churlish.
Yep.
Yeah, when all you're really trying to do in those cases is correct someone or ask a question or whatever, get clarification. So yeah, that's sort of what you would ideally do is create an environment, perhaps as a behavioral analysis, where you can start to. I mean, this is just maybe my sense of it. I don't
Sure,
know, like
sure. Go ahead.
sure, but maybe that can be part of a long term goal structure is to say wherever you're at in terms of your ability to reason and just your ability to reflect and to have reflective judgment, wherever you're at on the spectrum, are you at the very high end, at the very low end, somewhere in the middle? Because there's plenty of in between where you can be on that. There's literally they have broken it up into 7 different kind of stages. 7, 6, and 7 are like the high operating that we talked about, where you are
Yeah,
reflective and you recognize uncertainty and you
that's right.
don't let that shut you down, but instead
So
you
you
use it.
said there's 6 or 7 levels?
7,
So think
yeah.
about that. That's 6 or 7 basically groups of people
Hmm.
that already basically are able to judge reality on a different way, right? Because there's 7 different ways to really evaluate it, right? That's how they can do it. So just imagine without uniformity of education, without teaching everyone the same truth, this is what we have. We have just a bunch of people screaming over each other, saying that each one is wrong, and it's 7 different ways of doing it, of looking at things. You know what I mean? Or under analyzing information and sources of that information, and it just when it's artificially, we're artificially taught different things, different truths, then we are divided. And this
100%.
divide starts with when we are in school as little children.
Yeah, it starts even before you get to school. It starts from your parenting. It starts. I mean, but yes, to your point, it starts very early on. Um, so yeah, but it's interesting that you point that out. So yeah, there are people operating in all these different ways.
Hmm. And that's
But
why right now we have, the administration is really trying to take the education department over, because they understand that in order to remain in power, you cannot allow more people become educated and find out what is actually happening.
sure, it's you'll see it sometimes where you'll invest like $1 billion into like a new stadium for entertainment for sports, so that's where people's focus, time, and energy goes into, which is
Distractions.
well, no offense to people, but like if that's where all your energy is going into, that's a pretty um, it's not very useful. It's not, you're not going to
It's
grow
not. It's
from
not.
that.
Yeah. It's. Remember, it's the worshiping behavior. I think I did a video about it. It's called the worshiping behavior of wasting time.
It sounds exactly like that.
Yeah.
It sounds like worshiping behavior and wasting time for sure.
Exactly. Yeah.
And I don't mean to be rude about that. I
No, I'm
understand.
not rude. I used to be a person who engages in worshiping behavior. I've followed celebrities. I went to concerts and movies, and I wanted to be at whatever signing of CDs or whatever they did. Waste of my time. Now I understand that that's exactly what they want you. They want you to be distracted with pretty talented people while they're robbing you and your children and your great children 40, 50, 100 years ahead.
Yeah, and but it's not only that. It's not just like yeah. So you see a high investment in those kind of things where you'll take tax dollars and put it into a city building a new football stadium, baseball stadium, whatever, and at the same time defunding the public education.
Yeah.
Like that's not made up. That's you can go
Ooh,
and see
yeah,
what people
I
want to do.
completely concur with that point of view. I absolutely agree.
So yeah, it's targeting people's ability to grow and to become reflective, reasonable people.
Hmm.
It's basically minimizing the odds of that happening.
Yeah.
Someone can still get through it. Someone can just go to the public library all the time and get lucky enough to have the right people influencing them, and have that one bad experience that really just forces them or kind of coaxes them into like, okay, let me get my shit together, or let me not allow this to happen again. Sorry for cursing. Um,
That's totally fine. Don't worry.
but yeah, so you'll find exceptions, but the general rule and trend is that because people are operating with respect to their environment and their genetics and experiences, if you create this sort of environment
Yeah.
where
And if you
education
teach them
becomes
different things, it's just so much easier to take advantage of them.
well,